Hi, welcome to the first episode of Unsolicited Rambles, and today's episode is in part brought to you by people who can't shut the hell up about what they've read last year. Now, there are a lot of people that they held up books and they're like, this is the most amazing book, you should read this book. They might have loved it, right? And this person might be your crazy uncle, this person might be that grandma that you get to see every once in a while. The point here is, I used to work as a bookseller, and as a bookseller, you get recommendations from left to right, from right to left, and at the end of the day, you find yourself just sitting in your room browsing YouTube or like Instagram or something because you're so overwhelmed with all of these recommendations. People can just freely chuck you a thing. And you, as a gullible person, as a gullible reader, which most of us are, if we don't know much about literature, if we don't have a sense of judgment, that's the camp that we're going to fall into. Gullible readers. It's easy for us to fall into all of these traps of like, oh my God, maybe I should read that book recommended by my crazy grandma. Maybe my crazy uncle's right. Maybe I should go read Charles Dickens's Tale of Two Cities because he loved it when he was 20. Or like you go read that book that your crazy uncle wanted you to read, and like a couple pages in, you're like, holy shit, this is the most boring book ever in the world. But then there's the skill, and then you feel guilty for not finishing the book. You feel guilty for like not stacking that book on a pile of read books. Here's the fact. I read this article somewhere and I really don't know where I've read it from, but the article basically said, this is how you read more books. The minute that a book gets just bad or boring or unengaging, you move on to the next book. And the key point of practice here and like the key insight here is that you always want to make sure that you have something in your hand that you're actually interested in. So directly, you're going to spend more time reading because if you find the material that you're reading engaging, you're going to pour over the book 24/7, right? So my current read right now is Consider This by Chuck. There are many pronunciations of his last name, Palahniuk. I'm going to pronounce it as Palahniuk, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So this book came up on my feed on Instagram, actually, from Clifford Lee Sargent from Better Than Food, from his Patreon review, actually. And I'm just like, I'm not going to watch a review. I'm going to read a book myself before I, support you on Patreon, Cliff. And I bought it. And a day later, I'm already halfway through it. Whereas before I was slogging through Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist, that's like a week later, I've only read 100 pages. That's a sign of a book that I shouldn't continue reading because that's going to slow me down. It's going to put me out of touch with books that I will actually enjoy. So if you adopt the philosophy of like, if something gets boring, just chuck it away, directly it's going to result in more time devoted to reading because it's like there's a cheesecake in the fridge. Like if you love cheesecake, you would just rush over to the fridge, you would open up the fridge, you would eat the cheesecake, right? Simple as that. If you hate cheesecake, well, you won't bother with the cheesecake. It's going to rot in the fridge. Green stuff is going to grow out of it, but you still wouldn't touch it. And I know a lot of you guys are probably typing comments down below and you're like, well, what if a book gets really good towards the end? You need to suffer through all the pages of crap to get to the gold at the end. I'm just like, really? That's just not an interesting way to read, right? I want every page I read to be interesting. I want every story I've ever finished to be life transforming. Life is way too short to read stuff that you don't enjoy. And we're not going to judge your taste here. Like, you can be into like the high-minded shit like the Iliad or Odyssey, Ovid. Like, you can read whatever. You can read like Don Quixote in a week if you really want to. But I spent a better part of 2 months just digging through David Sedaris' canon. Like, David Sedaris is a great author, but he's not like anything high-minded, or I think he's pretty high-minded. But you do get my point, right? So there's no like, your crazy uncle isn't a literary judge on a panel, and even though these literary critics from like the New Yorker or something, you don't necessarily have to listen to their opinions. Opinions remain opinions. Only your intuition can tell you what to do. That's what's preventing many people from discovering their literary tastes. I mean, like, you can be into the classics, you can be into like short stories by certain people. Some people are into sci-fi, but I could never ever get into sci-fi because I feel like my brain is just like not in that department. But I'm a giant fan of creative nonfiction. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people are into fiction, right? But, creative nonfiction is kind of like my cup of tea, and the classics might be my cup of tea, but they don't have to be your cup of tea. And again, I'm not your uncle. I'm not a literary critic of the New Yorker. Don't come to me for recommendations. However, I will be posting what I've read over the months on my website, which you can find a link to in the description down below. If you care enough about me, that is. That's the insight that I want to communicate to you through this video and the sun setting. That's why the video, if you scroll the video to the very beginning, it was a brighter video. And that, kids, that's why you should never light your subject using window light, because it's It varies. And the next video is probably going to be not in this room anymore. And I'll see you guys in a new apartment.